Elliot's mother never said anything openly cruel in front of him. That was the impressive part. She preferred small injuries, the kind you couldn't repeat later without sounding unstable yourself. The first time I met her, she looked me over in the foyer of their house. Not rudely, not warmly either. Then kissed my cheek and said, "Oh, you're prettier than I expected." Everyone laughed after that, even me. I remember laughing because I thought maybe I was nervous and imagining things. Later that night, Elliot found me rinsing wine glasses in the kitchen and asked why I seemed quiet. "Your mom thinks I'm stupid," I told him. He looked genuinely confused. "What?" "No. She talks to me like I'm applying for something." He laughed at first, then stopped when he realized I meant it. The thing about wealthy families is they almost never attack directly in the beginning. First, they hand you tiny polished humiliations and watch whether you swallow them gracefully. I got very good at swallowing them gracefully. My name's Nora Bennett. I was 29 when Elliot died. I worked overnight hospital billing because the differential pay was better, which sounds responsible until you realize it mostly meant arguing with insurance representatives at 3 in the morning while eating vending machine pretzels under fluorescent lights. Elliot Mercer was a trauma surgeon from one of those families that treat money like inherited bone structure. The kind where everyone already assumes your children will sit on boards before they're even born. I came from a duplex outside Pittsburgh where my mother stored grocery coupons inside an old cookie tin, and my father fixed things with electrical tape long after replacement made more sense financially. None of that mattered to Elliot, at least not to him directly. To his family, though, class wasn't background information. It was character evidence. I noticed it immediately. At dinners, they asked questions that sounded polite until you replayed them later in bed. Did your parents travel much growing up? Were private schools uncommon where you lived? How interesting that your mother worked while raising children. They never outright insulted me. That would have been easier. Instead, they made my entire life sound anthropological. His sister Camille was especially gifted at it. Once she invited me to a charity event and casually mentioned Muted Neutral's photograph better under ballroom lighting. I panicked, bought a cream-colored dress I absolutely could not afford, showed up and discovered every other woman there was wearing black. Camille hugged me at the entrance and whispered, "Bold choice." I spent 4 hours wanting to disappear. The embarrassing thing is part of me still wanted them to like me. Isn't that pathetic? Even after years of subtle humiliation, I kept thinking eventually they'd realize I loved him for real, and stop treating me like a temporary disruption in the family ecosystem. Human beings adapt to emotional discomfort faster than they should. Elliot tried. He really did. He defended me when he noticed things. But people raised inside systems stop hearing certain frequencies. His mother's tone barely registered to him anymore because he'd grown up inside it. To him, she sounded normal. To me, she sounded like someone wrapping criticism in silk. About 6 months before he died, something shifted. Not dramatically. No screaming matches, no giant revelations. Just small fractures that started appearing everywhere if you paid attention closely enough. He began locking his office at home. Started taking calls outside. Once I woke around 2 in the morning and found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, staring at his phone with one hand over his mouth. There was a glass of whiskey beside him, almost untouched except melted ice. Elliot never wasted bourbon. That's honestly one of the details that stayed with me. "What happened?" I asked. He startled hard enough to make me jump too. "Nothing," he said too quickly. Then he smiled. One of those assembled smiles people build manually when they're trying to prevent questions. People in love cooperate with denial all the time. That's one of the less romantic truths nobody talks about. A few weeks later, we had dinner at his parents' house. His father was discussing hospital expansion plans. Camille was talking about donor events. Elliot interrupted and asked a question about accounting discrepancies in one of the family-owned medical subsidiaries. The entire room stopped moving. Not metaphorically. Literally. I heard the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. His mother took a slow sip of wine before answering. "That's business, darling." "I know it's business," Elliot said. "I'm asking why numbers changed after audit review." Camille suddenly became very interested in cutting her salmon. His father's jaw tightened. Then, unbelievably, his mother smiled at me and asked, "Nora, how is work? Still doing overnights?" Like redirecting a distracted child. I looked at Elliot. He wasn't angry. That's the part that bothered me. He looked disappointed. Deeply disappointed. At the time, I didn't understand why that expression scared me more than yelling would have. I do now. 3 months later, he proposed to me in my apartment while trying to fix my broken coffee table with duct tape. We were eating Thai takeout balanced on a laundry basket because the table leg kept collapsing. I genuinely thought he was joking at first. "I don't even own real furniture," I told him while crying. "You own 7 open sauce packets," he said. "That's basically resilience." I miss him in stupid microscopic ways now. The way he bought bananas, then forgot to eat them. The way he whistled terribly while reading charts. The fact he checked expiration dates obsessively, but somehow still drank expired milk half the time. After he died, I found black bananas on the counter and sat on the kitchen floor crying so hard I scared myself. Grief humiliates you privately before it humiliates you publicly. The accident happened on a Thursday during heavy rain. Interstate guardrail. I learned most of the details online before anyone officially called me because somebody leaked it to local media almost immediately. By the time I reached the hospital, there were already reporters outside. A nurse I'd never met hugged me in the hallway before anyone formally confirmed he was gone. That's how obvious it was. I remember staring at her ID badge instead of her face because looking directly at another human being felt physically dangerous somehow. Then Vivian arrived. Camel coat, pearl earrings, perfect posture. She hugged me briefly and immediately said, "You shouldn't speak to reporters right now." Not. "Are you okay?" Not. "He loved you. Just media strategy." That should have told me everything. The next few days dissolved into exhausted fragments. Flowers arriving, cold coffee everywhere, strangers touching my arm. Camille crying beautifully in public, then checking her phone during prayer meetings when she thought nobody noticed. At one point, I yelled at a florist because the lilies smelled too strong. The poor woman looked horrified. I apologized immediately, then sat in my car crying because I'd become someone who screamed about flowers. Meanwhile, the Mercers took over every decision with terrifying smoothness. Funeral arrangements, press statements, guest lists, seating charts. They never pushed me out aggressively. That's what made it impossible to explain to outsiders. They just kept gently removing things from my hands while calling me sweetheart. The visitation happened at the Mercer estate. I wore black heels that cut my ankles open within the first hour because grief apparently destroys your ability to think ahead about practical things like skin. Doctors came. Board members, politicians, women in expensive black dresses touching my arm delicately while already scanning the room for someone more important. I stood beside Elliot's portrait, greeting people for almost 3 hours. Past tense started making me physically ill. He was such a brilliant man. He cared about you deeply. He spoke so highly of you. Cared. Spoke. Every sentence sounded like dirt hitting wood. Then Vivian found me standing near the library trying not to cry again. "You must be exhausted," she said softly. I'm okay. This has all become overwhelming for everyone. Everyone. Interesting choice of word. Grant walked over carrying champagne glasses. He handed one to his mother, not me. We're meeting with legal tomorrow morning, he said casually. My stomach tightened immediately. Legal? Administrative things, he replied. Nothing dramatic. Whenever wealthy people say nothing dramatic, prepare yourself for emotional violence delivered in professional vocabulary. The next morning, I changed outfits 4 times before leaving my apartment. One looked too cheap. One looked like I was trying too hard. One made me seem younger than I wanted. At one point, I sat on my bed holding a sweater and genuinely considered not going at all. That's how intimidation works when done properly. It makes your disappearance feel self-directed. The Mercer family office occupied the top floor of a glass building overlooking the river. Everything inside smelled faintly like leather and expensive coffee. The receptionist spoke to me in the same tone people use offering valet validation. I arrived early. Nobody else did. I sat alone in the conference room for nearly 20 minutes, staring at a bowl of decorative white orchids and trying not to cry into a bottle of sparkling water. When the others finally entered, they came together. Vivian, Grant, Mr. Mercer, 2 attorneys, a trust officer from the family bank. Nobody hugged me. That was the first thing I noticed. The lead attorney opened a folder immediately and began speaking about asset continuity and governance structures and interim authority. Half the words barely registered because grief had turned my brain into static electricity. Then he slid a packet toward me. There is a proposed support arrangement prepared on behalf of the family. Support arrangement. The phrase landed wrong instantly. I opened the folder. Monthly stipend, temporary housing support, confidentiality language. My cheeks started burning, not because of the money, because of the tone. Every page sounded like compensation after a workplace incident. I don't understand, I said quietly. Grant folded his hands together. We want to avoid confusion later. What confusion? Vivian answered before he could. You and Elliot never married. There it was. Clean, prepared, rehearsed. The room became painfully quiet after that. I lived with him. Yes, Vivian said gently. And Elliot was always generous. Generous. Something inside me physically recoiled. Not partner, not family, not fiancé. A recipient. The trust officer still wouldn't meet my eyes. That bothered me more than anything else in the room. People avoiding eye contact during legal meetings usually know exactly where the danger is buried. I flipped another page. There's a non-disclosure agreement in here. Grant sighed softly like I was becoming exhausting. Nora, this is extremely fair. Fair. I swear wealthy people use that word when they want gratitude for minimizing damage. I suddenly became aware my hands were shaking. I tucked them beneath the table. Vivian noticed anyway. A tiny flicker crossed her face. Satisfaction. That's what finally snapped something awake in me. Not the paperwork. Her relief. She thought I was collapsing exactly on schedule. Then Elliot's voice replayed in my head so clearly it startled me. If things start feeling strange, wait for Daniel. He'd said it weeks earlier while half asleep beside me. At the time, I barely processed it. Now every nerve in my body tightened. I looked up slowly. Where's Daniel? The room changed immediately. Grant sat straighter. Mr. Mercer finally looked directly at me. The trust officer lowered his pen. Vivian recovered first. Daniel hasn't handled family matters in some time. I didn't ask that. Silence. I pushed the papers away. I'm not signing anything today. Grant exhaled hard through his nose. Nora, no. My voice cracked embarrassingly on the word, and I hated myself for it immediately. Vivian leaned forward slightly. You're emotional right now. God, I hated that sentence. Women like Vivian weaponize calmness. They turn your grief into evidence against your judgment. I'm grieving, I said quietly. That's different. Nobody answered. The attorney adjusted his glasses. There are timing sensitivities regarding operational control. Operational control. I looked around the room and realized something deeply wrong. Nobody looked heartbroken anymore. Anxious? Yes. Impatient. Defensive. Careful. But not heartbroken. And suddenly a terrible possibility entered my mind. What if Elliot hadn't only been afraid of dying? What if he'd been afraid of what happened after? I stood too quickly and my chair scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone flinch. Good. I need air. Grant stood too. Let's not create unnecessary conflict. There. Finally. An honest sentence. Because this meeting was never about helping me. It was about containment. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Then Vivian spoke behind me in that same soft, polished voice. You have to understand, Nora. Elliot confused love with responsibility sometimes. I stopped walking. My whole body went cold. Because in one sentence, she erased our engagement, our home, our future, his choices, my grief. All of it reduced to a rich man temporarily overhelping a woman beneath his station. I turned around slowly. And for the first time since Elliot died, I stopped wanting his family to approve of me. That feeling simply ended, like a wire snapping inside my chest. I looked at the unsigned papers on the table, then at the trust officer still avoiding my eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. Finally, I said, I'll wait for Daniel. Grant's composure cracked first. Only slightly, but enough. And in that exact moment, I realized something important. They weren't confident. They were rushing, which meant somewhere underneath all the polished voices and administrative language, there was something they were terrified I might discover